the buying and selling of sexual services is a criminal offence in South Africa. But now the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development has begun engagements with lobby groups working to decriminalise the sex work sector. Joining us for an update on their campaign to legalise sex work is Media Advocacy Officer at Sex Work Education and Advocacy Task Force, or SWET for short, Megan Lesson. Megan, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We believe you had some consultations or a meeting with the department today. Before we get into, an update of what transpired, perhaps just background information of how we got to this point.
Hi, Dudu. Thank you for having me. So just a little bit of background. It's a little because it's about 25 years of advocating for the decriminalization of sex work. But in the last year or so, a lot of our focus had been on, different avenues. A lot of it, we've had some partners wanting to challenge the Sexual Offences Act, which we all know is an apartheid law that kind of grew from the Immorality Act, and that is how sex work came to be criminalized in this country. But then, and obviously our advocacy to the Department of Justice to look at, and I'm sure people know that most of our advocacy is related to the human rights violations around such an outdated law. So I think in August of last year, we got some feedback at that time from the Deputy Minister and set up a meeting, and we met, Sisonke, the National Movement of Sex Workers, SWET, the Asijiki Coalition for the Decriminalization of Sex Work, and, a very frank discussion, of what is currently happening under criminalization in this country. And at that point, the minister then said, I think it is time at this point for some consultative workshops and engagements. And he asked us at that time to submit a proposal to that effect, and then we did. Because in that meeting, there was also a lot of stuff that comes up, and I'm thinking for those who have these conversations around decrim, a lot of conversations, people look at sex or the selling of sex as, more of a moral issue. So a lot of his concerns and questionings were around those factors, and that came up in that meeting. And then we said, what, let's have this engagement and let's put these issues on the table, and that is what happened today. So the department proposed twofold. They want to have another one towards the end of the month. They gave us 2 dates, maybe around the 18th or around the 28th. That would be still determined, but that will be in Johannesburg, And then also look at other people. So the department has been forthcoming and very transparent to say that they cannot only consult with people pro-decrim like us, Swet, Sisonke, and the Asijiki Coalition, but also look at those people who oppose it. And it was a very, very fruitful meeting today.
Just remind us perhaps of your proposed policy option, and maybe just expand further in terms of what came out today. We understand there's a Nordic model that was being spoken about. What does it speak to?
So we are advocating for the full decriminalization of adult consensual sex work. What other groups have talked about is what they call the Nordic model that they employ in countries like Sweden and Ireland, which is the partial criminalization, but it's not at all. Because I also just have to say this, which is very important, is that usually when we have these kind of engagements with government departments, there is always this tendency to kind of get all these academics in a room and talk research and research and research, and we didn't want that. This is why this room today was filled with sex workers who talked about their lived experience, who've done consultations on legislation, on a potential decrim bill. It's not like we just talk about lived experience, which of course is very important, because we always come from the standpoint is that the people who advocate are the people who live the realities that they're living. And so we filled this room with actual sex workers, and because I know we cannot really compare one country to another, but similarly, we also listen to sex workers globally. And already those sex workers currently living in those countries where this Nordic model is employed is already saying this model is not working. It has increased violence against sex workers. It has increased human rights violations against sex workers. So we also listen to other sex workers, and that is very important, that we have always maintained that from a human rights aligned framework, that the full decriminalisation of sex work is what we advocate for and what we stand by.
Curious to find out what some of these workers had to say, particularly with the issue of criminalizing sex work in terms of consequences, right? Because then you have the black market, people who will then take advantage of the situation. It won't necessarily end just because it's illegal, but it still happens in the country. What have they had to go through as a result?
We had to also remind the department today that those issues such as human trafficking is something that we strongly oppose, because human trafficking is a crime. But human trafficking is also not unique to the sex work industry. In fact, research shows that it's far more prevalent, in the agricultural sector, in the mining sector. So it is not something unique or just it is happening in the sex industry. And also it is, while it has... Sweat in the past has worked tirelessly, because we have a helpline, we have sex workers who have very good relationships with departments such as the Department of Social Development, because sex workers do not want underage sex work in that industry. It tarnishes the industry and it is a crime. They have built good relationships with the Department of Social Development, where they've actually, and the Deputy Minister of Social Development have acknowledged this, that they have gotten calls from sex workers to say, please have a look, we're not sure about this person. And that is important. And it is also a risk, because remember, this buying and selling of sex is a crime. And when you reach out to show your concern, you are also exposing yourself as a sex worker. But this is also what we've been doing. But what we are also saying, it is not the job of sex workers to fight crime. The police and the Department of Justice should be looking at how to curb human trafficking in all sectors. It is not. There are plenty of countries where sex work is decriminalized. There is no research that suggests, even remotely, that the decriminalization of sex work has any impact on the increased level of human trafficking.
Megan, listen, we have to say a big thank you to you for availing yourself this afternoon.